Greetings. It is another live stream. Last episode, I spoke to Mary Roscoe, who is with me as a trustee on SafetyCurtain, a charity that is very close to my heart, helps struggling actors and performance practitioners outside the UK with small grants, and that's sort of $1,200. And that pays for essential medical and living costs to enable them to continue to be artists in the situations that they're in. Those grant applications are received quarterly and the trustees come together, and it's a really hard decision to where to place the small amount of money that as a charity we have. So SafetyCurtain is an international lifeline for performers who are at risk across what is at the moment a very dangerous world. I spoke to Mary last week and she told me about her passion for SafetyCurtain and how Alan Rickman brought her on board, sadly, just towards the end of his life, and she never really got to be on the trustee committee whilst Alan was part of the driving force. But SafetyCurtain existed from 1999, and my guest today is Peter Searles. And Peter has been there from the beginning, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from Peter about what fuels his storytelling as a storyteller and also what ignites his activism. So, Peter, thank you for joining me. And yes, we're going to sort of hear the South American story because there's different parts of the world that SafetyCurtain focus on, and the different trustees have their passions of where they're kind of helping and finding people on the ground. So you're an actor or you're a storyteller. So how are you an actor or are you a storyteller?
Well, I guess I'm sort of a bit of each, really. I suppose actors are storytellers, but I also do acting on my own. In fact, I think actually I'm the only person who'll work with me now. But there we go. Yes. So I started doing storytelling. I call it storytelling, stand-up storytelling, comedy storytelling, quite by accident. I trained as an actor and worked as an actor for a number of years, and then. Well, I'll tell you sort of very briefly. I'll tell you how I got into it. I'd been traveling in South America, which I'll come back to, which is all connected to how I got involved with IPAT and ICAF. But in 1996, I was an out of work actor at the time, as I have been most of the time. And I met a comedian called Steve Frost in a place called the East Dulwich Tavern, and I ended up having a few drinks with him, and I ended up telling him about some of my stories about traveling around South America, which I'd for years had bored mates of mine with. And anyway, I told him the stories, a number of stories, and he enjoyed them. He said, "That's amazing." He said, "Tell you what, if you turn up here next Thursday, I can't pay you, but you can drink as much free Guinness as you like. But all I want you to do is just tell those stories to an audience." And I said, "Well, no script, no." He said, "You must be kidding me." Anyway, I thought he was joking. And then I got a call a week later saying, "Right, you're on." Anyway, I thought I'd last about 10 minutes. About 6 people would turn up and I could drink free Guinness the rest of the night. So I turned up and there was over 100 people in the bar, including mates of mine. Anyway, they were all sitting there waiting for me to do a show. So I did a show off the cuff about my travels in Peru. And it went down so well. He said, "You're right, you're going to Edinburgh with it." So in 1996, I went to Edinburgh with it. It sold out, got great reviews. I went back the following year, 1998 and 2000 and 2005 with 4 separate shows, and I've been trolling them around ever since. And that's how it all began.
So in terms of the Beyond the Fringe show, perfect candidate. So you were at the Fringe this year, and I know you're going to be looking to do some of your work in London, or maybe we do something online so that we can do some fundraising, because what we're both passionate about is SafetyCurtain and how we can help make that a sustainable charity. So your story goes back a long way with IPAT and ICAF. So even back, there was you were telling me in our pre-show chat about a Chilean actress and also your connection with work that you've done with the General London Council.
Oh, yes, that was late. Okay, well, how it all started was I was back in, I think it was 1980. I remember it was during the Falklands War, so it was 1982. I was playing Spadge Hopkins in Cider with Rosie, the Palace Theatre, Westcliff, when a fellow active friend of mine, Simeon Andrews, introduced me to a friend of his called Coco Rodolfi. She was a Chilean actress friend of his, and she was over visiting from Chile. And I remember afterwards, it was a Tuesday afternoon, and we got chatting, and she just told me this unbelievable story. The story being that, and I knew nothing about Chile then. I knew very little about politics, really. I wasn't really that political. It was one of the most sort of significant apocryphal meetings of my life. It completely changed my life, because what happened was she told me the story about how she, as a young actress, at the time of the coup in 1973, which I hadn't really heard of until that moment, she joined the resistance. For those of you, who aren't aware, in 1973 there was a coup in Chile where General Pinochet deposed the democratically elected socialist president called Salvador Allende, who was an extraordinarily enlightened man who wanted to spread culture and socialism, democratic socialism, and improve the lives of Chile. Anyway, there was this horrendous coup, and she joined the resistance, and one of her jobs was to find safe houses for fellow artists and priests and trade unionists who were on the run. But she was betrayed by a friend. She was very arrested, taken to a military barracks, severely tortured, thrown to a concentration camp, and then it was only 2 years later, when she was adopted by Amnesty, that she was allowed to come over to Britain. And she came over to Britain, where she met and married Malcolm Code. And then it was at this time, before I joined 10 years later, it was 1975, I think it was, when ICAF was formed. ICAF was formed largely, and there was, I think there was,
an ICAF, the International
Committee for Artist Freedom. Yes, there was another. Anyway, they took up the cause of the Chilean artists, and many of them came over in exile, but they weren't allowed to stay. So what they did was they set up this system where they got theatre companies to adopt Chilean actors so they could come and work over here, which meant that it sorted out the sort of the immigration legal processes, on both sides. And that's kind of where it all began with ICAF. So yes, anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's how it started.
Yeah.
And then, as a result of that, I tried to write a story. I tried to write a play about her story.
Mm-hmm.
Which I wrote a lot. I never finished it. But then I went to Cuba, and then I ended up going to South America for 8 months. And during that time, one of the things I did was I researched and wrote articles about underground theatre in Chile, 1986, 1987, during sort of the twilight years of the Pinochet dictatorship. And that's where I got a real insight into how important theatre is, and the role it played in Chile and outside Chile, because a lot of them were sent to exile, and how theatre, the flame of theatre, kept burning. They kept working during very difficult and dangerous times.
Yeah. I mean, just in our own history, the fact that all the theatres were south of the river in Shakespeare's time was because people didn't.
I'm not sure about that. I think they've just discovered one in Norfolk, actually, in King's Lynn.
Yeah, but there was that kind of subversiveness about theatre, and with theatre in Dario Fo's theatre work in Italy, that there was this conflict with the police, and there's always been this outspokenness about art and theatre. So your first meeting at ICAF, when it all started, what happened at the first meeting that you were at with ICAF?
Oh, I see. Well, yeah. So what happened? The reason before that happened, I was invited. I was talking about doing discussions, public discussions, for the Chile Solidarity Campaign, and a guy called Bobby Mill, who was a trustee with ICAF, saw me and persuaded me to join ICAF. And so I did, and my contribution was very much to all my experience in Chile. But anyway, yes, the first meeting was, I got a slight sort of misconception of how it operated. I remember this was 1987. It was the last 3 years of the apartheid system in South Africa. And I remember this elder lady who I didn't know at all, who I felt was rather scary. A case came up. There was 2 young ANC members who were being charged with terrorist activity of some kind, and they were facing execution. They were too young. They were actually actors, performers. And I remember Miriam Carlin saying, "Oh, darling, no." It was Miriam Carlin. That's who the scary lady was. She said, "Listen, we can sort this out. I'll have a word with Chuck," she said. Now, Chuck was Charlton Heston, all right? We're going, what? And then she said, yes, and Chuck can have a word with Ronnie. Ronnie was Ronnie Reagan. And then Ronnie can have a word with PW. That's PW Botha. And blow me down, a couple of weeks later, Miriam had spoken to Chuck. Chuck had spoken to Ronnie. Ronnie had spoken to PW. And PW got back to Ronnie saying, all right, we'll let him off. And Chuck then let Miriam know, and Miriam let us know. And I thought, this committee's amazing, you know. Any problem, pick up the phone, you've got the President of the United States 2 calls away. Anyway, didn't quite work out like that.
Oh, if only the world of entertainment at our level had that much power now.
I know,
yes.
I know, yeah.
Yeah,
anyway.
and as I say, back to power, aren't we? I mean, all activism and all grassroots activism and trying to come together as groups of people together, it is about finding a form of activism to challenge power.
Yeah. Yes, it's a totally different story now. We can't get near any of these, you know, governments everywhere are.
Yeah,
you know,
it's all very much changed.
Yeah. That's largely done by the secretaries, you know, Maria and oh my God, ICAF. Louise.
Very annoying.
Yes, Louise. They tend to do all the hard graft, you know, contacting people. We just, you know.
Yeah, as I say, SafetyCurtain. Mary was saying in last episode how SafetyCurtain was evolved in the new era when we've had Bill Patterson and Celia Imrie as our presidents, and how they've tried to shape and help us move, you know, the modern vision of what we're trying to achieve. Because just finding out your story, and every trustee has a story of why SafetyCurtain is important to so you're very much.
Just to make the distinction between ICAF and SafetyCurtain, ICAF is more sort of a campaigning charity. ICAF tends to sort of be, you know, about if actors are facing censorship or you know, torture or arrest or oppression or whatever have you, we tend to campaign for put pressure on governments and bodies to and campaign for their release. Whereas IPAT is more it's like a fully fledged charity, really. It's about providing relief, you know, basically food, shelter, and if necessary, essential medicines and that sort of thing. It's more humanitarian. So one's more campaigning and one's more, you know.
Yeah. So as I say, the Music for Hope. I think when I first started, when I was first taken on as a trustee, Music for Hope, there was a few stories that came out and some works that they were doing. They've come over to the UK. Do you know the foundation of the Music for Hope? Was that?
Well, yeah. Well, funny enough, I've just seen Tony Luna.
Yeah, no. Tell us about Music for Hope.
At the McCunfer. Well, he was Music for Hope was in El Salvador. El Salvador is somebody may be aware. It's reached. Well, I mean, since that awful civil war back in the 80s, the whole place has sort of disintegrated and become very factionalized and divided. But so a lot of young El Salvadorians went into exile and ended up in the suburbs of LA, and they formed these gangs, and they came back, and basically El Salvador's been run by gangs. And I think they're all being imprisoned now. But Tony Luna, they had this program where young people were trapped. You know, they were basically put in a situation where they had to join this gang or that gang, and if they didn't, you know, they could be killed, murdered. And so Music for Hope was created as a vehicle, as a means of providing a sort of sanctuary for young people where they could go and practice music together, you know, so they could get off the streets, get out of the way, and do something that was constructively useful. But even then, the gangs would try and get in and influence people. And Tony Luna, who was one of the leading lights of this extraordinary, brilliant enterprise, was basically picked on and said, "You've got to either join." And basically, he just got married and what have you, and he was facing death threats, and he had no choice but to leave. He had to get out. So SafetyCurtain helped get him out, and he's now very happily set up in Liverpool. He's one of our, I'd like to say, quite a few success stories, you know. And I was performing at a festival a couple of weeks ago in Machynlleth, the Victor Hara Festival, which was celebrating 50 years of solidarity and you know, friendship with the exiled Chileans. 50 years of solidarity, yes, since the coup in 73. And Tony was there, and he's actually helped organize and stuff there. So he's been fully sort of integrated into the into now.
So there's a vein of Chilean activism, and Cuba has come on the horizon as well recently. With we currently have David Johns joined us as a trustee, and
yes,
he's been talking about Cuba. So just, I know Mary got a little bit confused about some of your work, interviewing Castro.
Oh, I can be very confused. I'm very confused.
Just tell us about some of those stories, some of the pieces of work that you've developed over the years with South American countries, and how that dialogue of activism is written into your work.
Well, I have 3 shows. Yeah, 3. They're called Hey Gringo, Through Peru, Bolivia and Beyond, and A Chile Christmas. And each show tells the story of a period of time I was in each country back in the mid 80s. The Cuba story is slightly different. I once I'd met Coca, and I'd met her husband as well. Her husband is Malcolm Coate, who was the foreign correspondent for The Guardian. That's when I became really sort of obsessed with Latin American culture, films, theatre, everything. I remember there's a big series on Channel 4, and I remember I saw this advert in Time Out in 1983. I'd just been working here, and I had a sort of a break, and I saw this advert to go to the Latin American Film Festival in Havana in 1983, and it was to stay at the Hotel Nacional, and we would be there for a month and see loads of films and stuff, all for, I think it was 240 quid, and I had about 280 quid on me. And I just on a whim went, and it was an extraordinary experience, because amongst other things I ended up meeting Fidel and Che Guevara's ex-boyfriend, and all sorts of fascinating, extraordinary, interesting people. But that really whet my appetite, and that, as a result of that experience and seeing all those films and meeting all those people, I met a lot of Chileans there. I decided I had to go to Chile at some point, and go to Peru, or go to South America. And 3 years later, I bought a ticket to Lima, and the idea was to stay for as long as my $5 a day budget would allow me, and then return from Santiago, the capital of Chile, where I would actually, while I was there, go and stay with Coco and Malcolm for a while as well. And that's what I did. Yes. So you can see why Mary gets confused. Of course she does.
I think you all have the stories of, you know, how the world has coloured your perspective on how you bring yourself to SafetyCurtain, and what it is that you can offer in terms of a dialogue back, and finding out how is your involvement with SafetyCurtain at the moment? Why is it important for you to be a trustee, and what do you look to bring to the trustees meetings when you see the notes? What do you, because I think this is it. I want to sort of help anyone who is watching. SafetyCurtain's a very small charity. If it's a trustee, we all have different stories, but we come together in a quarter, and we get sent reports of money that's been sent out, what they've done with that, and whether they're asking for a top up, or whether there's new people. So what stories do you take from SafetyCurtain, and what have you?
Well, regarding the committee, I mean, regarding the charity, I mean, we are a motley crew, to say the least, and everybody has their own you know, skills and talents. Quite what mine are, I'm not quite sure. You know, I have in the past. I suppose the one thing I would say is, yes, that like Mary, has experience actually in Zimbabwe, so she knows. I suppose, yeah, I did spend quite a while in Chile, and I know quite a lot about Chilean culture and Chilean, and in fact, in my shows, which I do quite often as fundraisers, they're quite sort of apt for raising money for both ICAF and IPAT, SafetyCurtain, sorry, I should say. Yes, I have to keep correcting myself there. So yes, I mean, do you know what? I mean, I've written all these. I wrote all these articles about stuff, and I've forgotten so much of it now. But I remember at the time, I went to. It was in my first week in Santiago in Chile in '86. I was invited to a funeral of Chile's equivalent of Sir John Guild, a guy called Roberto Parada. And it was a major event, and then there was a party afterwards at Pablo Neruda's house, and I got an opportunity to meet loads of actors, nearly all of whom were blacklisted and out of work, who had stories to tell of friends who'd been murdered or sent to exile, tortured, and through that, I then met other people. I then ended up going into the shanty towns where, because a lot of them are blacklisted, what they do is they do work in the shanty towns where they work with the unemployed, with the homeless, with the elderly, and particularly with the young. And I was hooked up at one point with an Irish priest called Liam, sort of what they call a liberation theology priest. He'd been excommunicated from the Catholic Church, but he was passionate about theatre, amongst other things. And it was tough. It was rough. While I was there, I was, got involved in protests and things, and witnessed firsthand the brutality of the police, tear gassing and battening people. But one of the things he showed me was the story he told me. He showed me the theatre they had, which was just a bare platform, concrete platform with the remnants of wall around it. The police had blown it up a while earlier, and he described it as open air theatre now. But there was a young lad called Philippe who was part of their theatre group. And he was only 15. He was a very keen actor and a very good writer. And he'd written a play about conscription. And anyway, the police found out about it, or the authorities found out about it, and they tried to censor it. And then eventually they went in and they blew the theatre up, and then dragged him out and shot him in the middle of the street in front of his family. And that was the end of that. But that sort of thing was going. So yeah. There was so many. I'm going to give you another example as well. I mean, I had collected so many stories. I mean, not all of them, a lot of them, companies like Ictus, a lot of them, they kept going. And I wrote about them, and I introduced one or two of them to ICAF. Actually, there was one called El Telón, Teatro El Telón, who kept going. And then there's Pancho Morales with his open space theatre, who we kept supporting. And I suppose, yeah, I was like one of the main liaisons on the sort of the Chilean side.
Because as I say, it's that knowledge on the ground, that understanding of a different culture.
I had that unique experience, and that's why
you've lived there. What artists need. I think that is, I think SafetyCurtain, one of their major sort of points of helping to keep the flame of culture alive in the darkest of times. And it's a great sentence, but for those of you that know and have lived that, and you've seen artists live through that, SafetyCurtain being able to help artists and performers continue to perform rather than having to go and do another job to make a living, which we do a lot in this country as artists and performers. We have to do a day job to be a jobbing actors. Not everybody is a celebrity. Not everyone is a millionaire.
No.
We're jobbing actors, to quote Brendan Bradley.
But we could also learn so much from them as well. I mean, I'll give you one example of the type of things. There was a company called the Invisible Theatre, and I desperately tried to track down the director. I didn't, but I heard so many of the stories. But just very briefly, this is how the Invisible Theatre worked. Straight after the coup in '73, they would do things like they would organise these cultural evenings, and they'd be open to and they'd be sort of designed for, aimed at the more sort of middle class, middle of the road audiences. They weren't political. And what would happen is that they would usually sell out because there wasn't much else going on. And then somebody would get on stage and they'd do a poem about flowers or stuff. It was all very innocuous, popular stuff. And then somebody in the audience would stand up and say, what is this rubbish? Why are we listening to poems about flowers things when our artists are being tracked down and murdered in the streets and tortured? And then someone stand up and said, shut up, sit down, how dare you? We've come here for some culture, not politics, keep your communist ideas to yourself, and blah, blah, blah. And anyway, it would usually lead to sort of mayhem and fights and arguments. And then in the end, the whole people anyway, it turned out that all four of those people, they were all members of the Invisible Theatre. So the guy on stage, so the guy who's saying "Don't stop me," blah blah blah, and then they would discuss afterwards.
All the world's a stage. I mean, a lot of the current rise of immersive theatre, that kind of forum nature.
It was like hit and run Robin Hood theatre. They do the same thing in buses as well. Somebody would get on the bus and say, "Okay, here for 2 pesos is the solution to all your problems." The guys, right. So he'd give him 2 pesos, which is tuppence. Yeah, and he'd open it. It would say, "Get rid of Pinochet." Ooh, and then
overt flash mobs.
And then people say, "Who's that?" And then again, it was all them doing it.
Nice.
I remember we thought about doing it here. My mate Mike Packer and I, we were going to set up the Robin Hood, the hit and run theatre in London, and we were watching a rather tedious production of 6 actors in search of an author at the National, and we thought we're going to stand up and put our masks on and tell everybody how to. And I remember we were bobbing up and down all the time through the show, and finally everyone there, and we didn't do that.
Being able to that disruptiveness. There's a lot of talk about disrupting and being able to share a message in a place where the courage that they have.
Yeah, but they were also very clever as well, because what they also did was they learned how to present plays in a way that the politics was camouflaged, was hidden, and so the use of satire and humor, whereas people thought they were watching a sort of
how complicit would the audience have been with that? Do you think? Did the audience come along knowing that was going to happen?
Oh yeah, well the thing we have to understand about Chile has this fantastic tradition in theatre. It goes back to the 1880s, when. Chile became a very wealthy country through the nitrate mines and stuff, and then there became this big demand from the middle classes for good theatre, especially Western theatre. So by the middle of the 1880s, you had Ibsen and Shakespeare and Chekhov and all this stuff. And Chile's they're highly politicized, literate, much more so than the British, much more so. And that's why they call it the England of the Andes. And it's not for no reason. And then so what happened then was, they would get it all, and then. When Allende came to power, leading up to that period, there was a complete revolution in theatre where every, the money, the grants were given to companies, particularly in the shanty towns, so and in the factories. So they would create theatre everywhere, and there was the singer, the folk singer Victor Hara, who was also an actor, actually, who Coco worked with a number of times as an actor. Led this sort of revolution, particularly in the shanty towns of theatre, music, art, popular art, and so they were a highly politicized, highly literate audience, and they would have certainly got. I remember seeing a street fiesta theatre production of Jean Genet's The Maids, and I knew about it because I just played Madame in the Horseshoe Theatre in Basingstoke. In 1981, and it was a disguised critique of the sort of the empleada system. This is where the poor women in the shanty towns work in the households of the rich for nothing. But it was a very clever disguise. Whereas if it had been overt, they'd have been arrested for being subversive and communists. But it was very funny and very subtly hidden. That's another way of how they operated. But always, there was a risk. It got a bit more. It got a little easier towards the end, but it was.
And so it's giving you a wealth of stories to share and a passion to share. So coming a little bit more up to date. Everybody who comes in the show and everybody that I talk to at the moment, as we're going back into the world, we all have this thing in common that was the global pandemic. So what all your Chile sort of the 80s and 90s and sort of taking that into the turn of the century, it seems such a long time ago now. Tell me a little bit about what brought you up to the pandemic and where that spat you out the other side, and what's happening now and what's happening next.
Right. Well, Well, before the pandemic, I was doing quite a lot of work in Mexico. I was doing my shows there, and I met I got, I did this online. Well, before I did that, I did this online interview, and I got offered this job. I got offered this, actually a lead part in a series called Heart of Lunacy, which was, I won't go into detail now, but it was a major operation and a major project, and very exciting. It involved real and real characters and also actors. And it was a whole series based on recently released CIA files. It was all to do with the cold. Anyway, I won't get into too much detail about it, but
that's another episode.
Cut a long story short, yeah, COVID happened, and then also a lot of it took place in Russia, and it was almost, and then of course,
very different climate now of taking sex into Russia.
Yes, it would. Yeah. Anyway, so that's it. But anyway, so after that, well, there was that wonderful period for the first year of COVID where I think a lot of actors actually secretly quite enjoyed it, because we had an excuse not to be, out there desperately seeking work. We felt we could lie around and read and do what we like without watch telly, without feeling guilty that we should be doing stuff. So the first year was fine, but the second year was, that's when the novelty wore off. I also actually got married just before lockdown as well. So miracle, still married after 2 years of lockdown. Yeah. So I don't know if that's answered your question.
So have you so if you're going to do some shows for fundraising or just the shows that you're doing, what have you currently got in your repertoire? So if somebody wanted to have you come and tell stories for them, or if I was going to book you to be in a storytelling, what have you got in your repertoire?
Well, I have my 4 shows. I also do workshops I teach other people how to stand up, tell their own stories, and I've in the past I've directed and worked with. I actually directed 3 of Miles Jupp's solo shows, and I've directed quite a few shows. I've just directed another comedian in Edinburgh, marvelous man, wonderful comedian called Nick Wilty. He did a show about his time as a soldier in the Malvinas or Falklands War. But I have a new show which has been in the pipeline for about 20 years. Well, slightly less, called Dinner with Fidel, which is about going to Cuba, but more importantly, it's about, in fact, you mentioned Dario Fo earlier. It's about how I was commissioned by the GLC, eventually through Gavin Richards, to write a show about oil. I used to be an oil rigger, but that's another story. I'll tell you that another time. Don't know how much. How are we doing for time?
So the current show, we're fine. We're bringing it to a close. We're kind of
okay. Yeah, we'll save that for another time.
4 minutes, but no, just.
I am planning to do a show. I'd like to do, as it's still the 50th anniversary of the coup, of what happened in Chile. I'm hoping to organise a couple of, or at least 2 fundraisers for ICAF and IPAT, but also for other mates who haven't seen it and stuff. But I'm waiting to hear back from the venues, so it's a bit dependent on that.
So hopefully you'll find a venue.
I'll keep you posted.
Yes, and we will be, when that gets a date, you'll have to come and do a little snippet for us so that we can share that with so SafetyCurtain HQ is Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it at the moment. We also do have for SafetyCurtain a Facebook page, so do go find that. SafetyCurtain HQ in social media. SafetyCurtain.org.uk is our website. We try and bring things together. Please don't be too harsh on our website. If anybody wants to redesign our website, please do get in touch. But as it is, it's our little portfolio to try and share and keep our presence going. So Peter, thank you so much for coming and sharing all those stories. It's given me an insight into how SafetyCurtain has a colour and a way of connecting with South America, and I'm going to look forward to finding out the different areas of trustees' interests as I work through each of them. You're a ready-made series of guests for me, because that's all what's really hard. So if you've watched the show and you would like to come and talk to me, please do get in touch and we can have a conversation beyond the fringe. So Peter, thank you very much. And we shall bring this to a close. you.